Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are looking at the full story of Gandalf.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Gandalf the Grey is one of the most famous wizards to ever have been imagined, and that is for no bad reason. Whether he is calling Pippin a fool of a took, or standing toe-to-toe with a Balrog, Gandalf always had a way of rising to the occasion and being the voice of reason that you wish could have existed in your real life. Gandalf is debatably my favourite character in all of Tolkien's works, so this video is definitely one I've always wanted to do. So let's jump into things by rewinding all the way back to the beginning of time itself. To start off this story, we must be aware of just what Gandalf is. And that is one of the angelic beings known as the Maiar. Now these Maiar are divine spirits that were created by Ilúvatar, who is the equivalent of basically God within Tolkien's stories. Ilúvatar created two groups of divine spirits. One order consisted of the Valar and the other was the Maiar. The Valar were a group considered as lords and queens, with there being 15 of them, albeit one of these is the Dark Lord Melkor, who after committing the evil deeds that he did was no longer counted amongst them. But anyway, below the Valar there were other spirits known as the Maiar, and these were far more in number than the Valar, with each Valar having several of the Maiar serving under them. And this is where good old Gandalf comes into it. Although at this time he did not actually go by the name Gandalf at all. At this point in his existence he was in fact named Olorin. During his youth he served under a few different Valar, and the named ones of these are Manwë, the king of the Valar, his wife Varda, the queen of the Valar, Urmo, who was more commonly known as Lórien, who was the master of visions and dreams, and Nienna, the sister of Urmo, and was known as the Lady of Pity and Mourning. Now there is not a vast amount known of Olorin's earliest years, except for the passage we get from the section of the account of the Valar and Maiar according to the lore of the Eldar, specifically within the of the Maiar part, or from within the Silmarillion, where it says, "Wisest of the Maiar was Olorin. He too dwelt in Lórien, but his ways took him often to the house of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience. Of Melian much is told in Quenta Silmarillion, but of Olorin that tale does not speak, for though he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen, or in form as one of them, and they did not know whence came the fair visions or the promptings of wisdom that he put into their hearts. In later days he was the friend of all of the children of Ilúvatar, and took pity on their sorrows, and those who listened to him awoke from despair and put away the imaginations of darkness." So we can see from this, Olorin was not just the wisest of his kind, but also one of the few to embrace the idea of pity and patience and became fascinated with the children of Ilúvatar. Taking the example of Nienna within by taking that pity on those children and helping to lead them on. But now from these earlier times, there is then nothing told of the tales of Olorin until we reach the Third Age of Middle-earth. It took until the darkness of Sauron's power was growing ever greater for him to be brought to the front again. In this age, the Valar chose to send some help to fight against this servant of Morgoth, but not help in the form of warriors, but help in the form of guidance. This is where the Istari were chosen, being selected members from the divine spirits of the Maiar that were chosen to help overcome that darkness. Of these there were 5. Carumo, a Maiar of Aule who became known most commonly as Saruman. Iwendil, a Maiar of Yavanna who became most commonly known as Radagast. Alatar and Palando, both Maiar of Arome who became known as Morinitar and Romistamo, or Ithrin Luin, meaning the Blue Wizards. And finally, of course, Olorin, the Maiar of Manwë that we know as Gandalf. An interesting point about these 5 being chosen is that initially only Carumo and Alatar came forward themselves. However, Manwë knew that he wanted Olorin to go as well, due to his love of the Eldar that still remained within him. Olorin was not sure though, he felt he was too weak to challenge Sauron and feared him. But this just made Manwë believe all the more that this was a good reason for Olorin to go. And so, it was around the year 1000 of the Third Age that Olorin arrived to the lands of Middle-earth, having left Valinor to arrive at the Grey Havens, also known as Mithlond. Here he was met by both Círdan the Shipwright and Glorfindel. Círdan was one of the highly regarded of the Sindar and the master of the Grey Havens from the Second Age onwards. He was one of the most gifted with the skill of foresight and was honoured to be given one of the 3 elven rings of power by Celebrimbor, being the ring Narya, of which he gives to Olorin upon his arrival due to being able to see just a section of his true power despite his old appearance. And Glorfindel was one of the most powerful elves to ever step onto Middle-earth as well. He produced such great deeds that after being killed by fighting a Balrog, he was sent back, re-embodied during the Second Age on a similar mission to that of the Astari, which in fact in Tolkien's later writings was believed to be around the same time as the coming of the Blue Wizards, which was around the year 1600 of the Second Age. Now anyway, of these earlier years in Middle-earth, Olorin would not set up a permanent home like Saruman and Radagast would. In fact, we hear a bit of his initial years within the Unfinished Tales, where it tells us this. But the last comer was named among the elves Mithrandir, the Grey Pilgrim, for he dwelt in no place, and gathered to himself neither wealth nor followers, but ever went to and fro in the Westlands from Gondor to Angmar, and from Lindon to Lorien, befriending all folk in times of need. Warm and eager was his spirit, and it was enhanced by the ring Narya, for he was the enemy of Sauron, opposing the fire that devours and wastes with the fire that kindles, and succours in wanhope and distress. But his joy and his swift wrath were veiled in garments grey as ash, so that only those that knew him well glimpsed the flame that was within. Merry he could be, and kindly to the young and simple, and yet quick at times to sharp speech and rebuking of folly, but he was not proud, and sought neither power nor praise, and thus far and wide he was beloved among all those that were not themselves proud. Mostly he journeyed unwaringly on foot, leaning on a staff, and so he was called among men of the north Gandalf, the elf of the wand. For they deemed him, though in error as has been said, to be of elven kind, since he would at times work wonders among them, loving especially the beauty of fire. And yet such marvels he wrought mostly for mirth and delight, and desired not that any should hold him in awe or take his counsels out of fear. We can see this is where he picked up the name we all know him by best, Gandalf. This was certainly not the only name he went by though. As that quote said, the elves knew him as Mithrandir, the Grey Pilgrim, and there were many more names to go with this being too. He was also known by the likes of Tharkun to the dwarves, Icarnus in the south, Greyhaim by those from Rohan, or even the White Rider when riding upon Shadowfax, and this is just amongst some others as well. This is just another thing that shows just how much Gandalf liked to travel and wander, being known by all these different names throughout Middle-earth. After being in Middle-earth for around 100 years, Gandalf and the others of the Astari discovered there was an evil shadow growing within the forest that used to be known as Greenwood the Great, but now Mirkwood instead, specifically within the fortress of Dol Guldur in the south of the forest. Some believe this evil was the return of the Nazgul, but Gandalf feared it could be worse in that it could be Sauron himself making his return. Nothing would be done initially about this though, and so over the next couple of 100 years, this evil would grow and grow. The leader of the Nazgul, the Witch King, would build a fortress in Angmar to challenge Arnor. Orcs would multiply faster and faster in the Misty Mountains, while both Khazad-dûm and Minas Ithil would fall under shadow as well. Despite this, according to Appendix B at the end of The Lord of the Rings, it would take until the year 2063 for Gandalf to finally go and investigate Dol Guldur himself. Gandalf's appearance here caused Sauron to flee. However, at this point Gandalf was not able to confirm the true identity of this evil, only seeing it as the Necromancer. With Sauron having left, this marked the beginning of a time known as the Watchful Peace, a 400-ish year period where Sauron would hide, being too wary to challenge the wise head-on. Instead, here he chose to corrupt men in the east to grow his power more quietly. Despite this being quieter, it did not go completely unnoticed though. But nothing was really done until Sauron returned once more to Dol Guldur in 2460, more powerful than he had been before. So, to counter, a group considered as the wise formed the White Council. The White Council was formed with the purpose of uniting and directing the forces of the West in resistance to the Shadow. There were several members as a part of this group, but not all were named. The clearly stated members were Gandalf, Galadriel, Saruman, Elrond, and Círdan, with other Lords of the Eldar said to have also joined. It was Saruman who was appointed as the leader of this council, although initially Galadriel had wished for Gandalf to be the leader, but due to Gandalf wishing to never set down roots and being able to continue wandering as and when he wished, he declined this offer. Not much apart from the initial leader seemed to be decided at this first meeting, so Gandalf went back to his wanderings. In the following years, Gandalf visited many places, and it was around this time that he first came across the people known as the Hobbits in the Shire, and he quickly befriended them. This turned out to be quite fortunate for the Hobbits as well, as Gandalf gave them great aid to when they suffered the long winter in 2758. It was also here that Gandalf first witnessed the bravery and willpower of this race, which of course would set up many of his plans in the future. There was another period of quiet from Gandalf for the next 100 years, until he took it upon himself to look for the Dwarf King Thrain II of the Lonely Mountain, who had disappeared while camping under the eaves of Mirkwood, where he had in fact been captured and taken to Dol Guldur to be tortured by Sauron, so that he could take back the Dwarven Ring of Power that he had in his possession. Initially, Gandalf had no joy in locating him though. During these travels, said to be after the year 2845, Gandalf had travelled into and through the abandoned realm of Khazad-dûm in his search. He had entered from the east and exited through the doors of Durin on the western side. Having exited this side meant that he did not learn how to open them from the outside, as becomes apparent later as a part of the Fellowship. A few more years would pass when Gandalf would return once again to Dol Guldur, in secret this time, and this would be in the year 2850. Here he found Thrain within the pits, but not just this. Gandalf made the important discovery here that the necromancer was in fact not one of the Nazgul. It instead was indeed Sauron. Gandalf managed to escape from this and returned back to the other members of the White Council, announcing to them what he had discovered. He urged them to attack Sauron now, before he could regain more of his strength, before he could find the One Ring. However, Saruman, as the leader of this council, declared it would be better to watch and wait to see what unfolds, and not act rashly now. After all, the One Ring had been lost into the Anduin a long time ago. Many agreed with Saruman, so they did not attack at this time, but no one would yet realise Saruman's true intentions for suggesting this. The years would continue to roll on, and Gandalf would become wary of events going on elsewhere. He heard word that Smaug the dragon had claimed Erebor and destroyed the town of Dale, which led Gandalf to worry Sauron would try to create an alliance with this great beast to further enhance the strength of his forces, as well as gaining a stronger hold of the northern passes as well. So Gandalf wished to find a way to disrupt this. And this is where he received convenient word that the exiled dwarf king of Durin's folk, Thorin Oakenshield, was in fact hatching a plan to retake the mountain. Fate would then bring the two together, as one night in the year 2941, they both happened to be staying in Bree. They talked and decided to continue their travels together as they were heading in the same direction, and so this is where the plan for the quest of Erebor was conceived. Therefore, not long after, Gandalf turned up at Bag End with several dwarves behind him and persuaded the hobbit Bilbo Baggins to join their quest as their burglar. It took some convincing, but convince Bilbo, Gandalf did. Gandalf would join Thorin's company as well, at least until they reached Rivendell. During this early part of their quest, Gandalf played a vital role. He saved them from trolls, where he would find his sword Glamdring. He guided them through the Misty Mountains, killed the Great Goblin, and led the dwarves to their escape, even striking up a friendship with a great eagle named Gwaihir after healing a wound that they suffered when they were trying to save the company. Gandalf's assistance did not stop here though, for he also led them to the House of Beorn, and this would be where he parted ways from their quest. It was at this time when Gandalf left them at the edge of Mirkwood that an emergency meeting of the White Council would be called. Gandalf knew he had to convince the rest of the council to agree to attack Dol Guldur at this time, and this time he succeeded in even swaying Saruman's mind. And so they attacked Dol Guldur, where they managed to drive Sauron out, forcing him to flee back to Mordor. Now this quest was complete, it was time for Gandalf to return to the dwarves and Bilbo. He had heard their path through Mirkwood was challenging and they had been imprisoned by the Wood Elves. However, by the time he finally got back to this area, the company had escaped, got to Erebor, and prepared for an attack by the Lake Men and the Wood Elves. Gandalf heard how Bard had killed Smaug, and now he and Thranduil asked for Gandalf's assistance to reason with Thorin. Just before the battle between the dwarves, elves and men was about to begin, Gandalf managed to step in. He warned them that the forces of the likes of orcs and wargs would attack, and that they should be siding with each other, not against each other. He managed to convince them to fight on the same side, and just in time too before the orcs of the Misty Mountains attacked in the battle that became known as the Battle of Five Armies. After this battle, Gandalf would journey with Bilbo back to the Shire by way of Beorn's and then Rivendell to meet once more with Elrond to discuss all that had happened. Once this part of his journey was over, it had been confirmed to him that hobbits were worth taking a special note in, particularly the Bagginses. He would even return to visit Bilbo with the dwarf Balin in future years as well, bringing news of the goings-on in Erebor and Dale. There were a few years of quiet before Sauron would declare himself openly in Mordor. When this happened, the White Council met for their last time, this being in the year 2953, where they discussed what to do next about the Rings of Power. Here, Saruman's jealousy of Gandalf finally got the better of him, for he sent spies to start watching the Grey Wizard afterwards. This in turn meant Saruman learnt of the existence of the hobbits and the Shire, noting specifically that Gandalf had a great interest in these people. It was from this time that Saruman began sending his spies to keep a watch over Bree and the surrounding areas along with it. Around this time too, Gandalf learned of the creature Gollum's mission to find Bilbo Baggins and reclaim the precious that was stolen from him. However, Gandalf would not give him the attention that he should have at this time, as he discusses with Frodo in the chapter of The Shadows of the Past in The Lord of the Rings, where he says,
The Wood Elves tracked him first, an easy task for them, for his trail was still fresh then. Through Mirkwood and back again it led them, though they never caught him. The wood was full of the rumour of him, dreadful tales even amongst beasts and birds. The woodmen said that there was some new terror abroad, a ghost that drank blood. It climbed trees to find nests, it crept into holes to find the young, it slipped through the windows to find cradles. But at the western edge of Mirkwood the trail turned away. It wandered off southwards and passed out of the Wood Elves' ken, and was lost. And then I made a great mistake. Yes, Frodo, and not the first, though I fear it may prove the worst. I let the matter be. I let him go. For I had much else to think of at that time, and I still trusted the law of Saruman.
Gandalf would come to meet an important man next in the year 2956, and this is someone you are likely to have heard of, Aragorn, son of Arathorn and heir of Isildur. They quickly bonded and became friends in their joint quest to finally overthrow the Dark Lord Sauron. Aragorn was not the only man he would befriend in this time though, with another being Faramir, son of Denethor, during his visits to Gondor. Gandalf would teach him many things, which would cause great displeasure in Denethor, not liking that his son was becoming some wizard's pupil. This was very much a time of great travelling for Gandalf, visiting lands all over the western part of Middle-earth, with the Shire continuing to be one of his most frequently visited locations, keeping a keen eye on a never-aging Bilbo, as well as his younger cousin, Frodo Baggins, who appeared to be cut from the same cloth as Bilbo. Gandalf's mind did quite often veer back towards Bilbo, specifically to the magical ring that he found on the Quest of Erebor adventure, and the way Bilbo lied about how he originally got it. This was very un-Hobbit-like, and so he made sure to keep a close eye on him. Gandalf would return to Bag End once again in the year 3001 for Bilbo's 111th birthday and farewell party. With Bilbo leaving the Shire, Gandalf knew he must convince him to leave this ring behind, which he manages to persuade him to do. Gandalf was strongly starting to believe that this was indeed one of the magical rings of power, and so, after warning Frodo to never use the ring, but to keep it safe and keep it secret, Gandalf headed into the wild to hunt once again for the creature Gollum to maybe find some answers. Gandalf asks for help on this quest from Aragorn and his fellow Rangers of the North, with Aragorn helping him directly and the Rangers helping to guard the borders of the Shire. This hunt would go on for several years, with Gandalf only occasionally popping back in to check up on Frodo, but only ever under the veil of nightfall. During one of Gandalf's visits back to Minas Tirith, this time specifically to study the records that they kept, Gandalf found the Scroll of Isildur, all but revealing that Bilbo's magical ring could well be the One Ring. Conveniently, Gandalf would then receive word that Aragorn had succeeded in locating Gollum, and so he journeyed to Mirkwood to interrogate him for the answers that he hoped for. The information that he got from Gollum sent waves of fear through him. He learned that Gollum had revealed the names of the Shire and Baggins to Sauron when being captured in Barad-dûr. Gandalf made for the Shire with as much haste as he could muster. It is now April of 3018, and Gandalf has reached the Shire, and he manages to confirm with Frodo once and for all that this magical ring is indeed Sauron's old One Ring. Gandalf's plan was for Frodo to get the ring to Rivendell as soon as he could realistically do, which Frodo chose to do after his next birthday so as to not arouse suspicion. Gandalf initially stayed for a couple of months with Frodo before deciding he needed to leave after hearing of an ever-looming war in Gondor and the growing shadow from the east. He said to Frodo that he would be back before his birthday though, so as they could travel together. However, this did not go to plan. On his travels, Gandalf ran into the Brown Wizard of his order, Radagast, who brought him a message from Saruman, who said he needed to speak to him urgently, as the Nazgul had been seen looking for the Shire. And so, Gandalf made for Isengard to meet with Saruman, but stopped at Bree to leave a message for Frodo at the Prancing Pony with the innkeeper, Barlaam Butterbur, who of course forgets to send that letter. But now at Isengard, Gandalf learns of Saruman's true intentions, and after rejecting the chance to join him, becomes imprisoned upon the peak of Orthanc. Gandalf is rescued by the great eagle Gwaihir, who carries him to Rohan where he manages to obtain the mighty horse and chief of the Miras, Shadowfax. Gandalf once again headed for the Shire with as much speed as he could muster, and upon his arrival he learns that Frodo had already left when Gandalf had not returned in time. He also hears of Black Riders having been in the area too, and he begins to fear for Frodo, and so he makes for Bree, where he learns that Barlaam had never sent his letter. But somehow Frodo and his friends had still managed to come under the watch of Aragorn nonetheless. After a night's rest in the inn, Gandalf made for Weathertop, as here he could get the best view of the surrounding land to try and observe what is going on. Once again this did not go smoothly for Gandalf, as at night he was attacked by not just any simple men, but by the Nazgul. There was a great battle of light and flame, and Gandalf managed to drive off these dark servants of Sauron. He escaped, but not before leaving his mark on some stones, and then he made for the north, being followed by just 4 of the Nazgul. The only thing he could do now was head straight for Rivendell and hope that Aragorn could get the hobbits there himself. As they had approached the Elven stronghold, Gandalf helped Elrond to cause a flood in the Bruin Inn to drown the riders that followed them, and so they could survive the final stretch. After Frodo had healed from his wounds, the Council of Elrond was summoned to decide their plan for destroying the One Ring. Gandalf joined the Fellowship of the Ring as one of the 9 Walkers, and was chosen as their leader, with their first task being to cross the Misty Mountains, as Gandalf did not wish to even attempt to go near Isengard. This first plan failed as a terrible storm prevented them passing, and so, against Gandalf's better judgment, they took the passage of the ruins of Moria instead. Despite Gandalf having previously exited through the doors of Durin, it took some time for him to remember just how to enter this way instead. But they succeeded in getting in the end, and so they made their way through the maze of underground tunnels and halls. In time they would reach the Chamber of Mazarbel, where the Fellowship discovered that Balin and a party of dwarves had attempted and failed to reclaim this kingdom of their ancestors. The Fellowship's presence here had alerted the orcs that slept in Moria though, and so they were attacked. But the Fellowship managed to survive this initial assault and flee, making their way to the eastern gate that Gandalf was now aware of how to reach. Orcs were not the only thing that they had woken. Durin's Bane came for them, a Balrog of Morgoth, and well, from here it is quite well known what happened next. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on the staff in his left hand. but in his other hand Glamdring gleamed, cold and white. His enemy halted again, facing him, and the shadow about it reached out like two vast wings. It raised the whip, and the thongs whined and cracked. Fire came from its nostrils, but Gandalf stood firm.
"You cannot pass,"
he said. The orc stood still, and a dead silence fell.
"I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass."
The Balrog made no answer. The fire in it seemed to die, but darkness grew. It stepped forward slowly onto the bridge, and suddenly it drew itself to a great height, and its wings were spread from wall to wall. But still, Gandalf could be seen. Glimmering in the gloom, he seemed small, and altogether alone, grey and bent like a wizened tree before the onset of a storm. From out of the shadow a red sword leaped flaming. Glamdring glittered white in answer. There was a ringing clash and a stab of white fire. The Balrog fell back, and its sword flew up in molten fragments. The wizard swayed on the bridge, stepped back a pace, and then again stood still.
"You cannot pass,"
he said. With a bound, the Balrog leaped full upon the bridge. Its whip whirled and hissed.
"He cannot stand alone," cried Aragorn suddenly, and ran back along the bridge. "Elendil!" he shouted. "I am with you, Gandalf." "Gondor!" cried Boromir and leaped after him. At that moment Gandalf lifted his staff and cried aloud. He smote the bridge before him. The staff broke asunder and fell from his hand. A blinding sheet of white flame sprang up. The bridge cracked. Right at the Balrog's feet it broke, and the stone upon which it stood crashed into the gulf, while the rest remained, poised, quivering like a tongue of rock thrust out into emptiness. With a terrible cry the Balrog fell forward, and its shadow plunged down and vanished. But even as it fell it swung its whip, and the thongs lashed and curled about the wizard's knees, dragging him to the brink. He staggered and fell, grasped vainly at the stone, and slid into the abyss. "Fly, you fools!" he cried, and was gone. That was not the end of our Grey Wizard, though. He fell and fought for a long time with the Balrog. There was 8 days of combat between the two, fighting from the deep places below them all the way to the peak of the Endless Stair. Upon reaching the top, they fought for 2 more days and nights, but eventually Gandalf managed to throw down his enemy onto the mountainside. However, this took the last of Gandalf's strength, and so although technically he did not die, his spirit did leave Middle-earth. Again, this is not the end of Gandalf's story though, as Ilúvatar stepped in, and because of his commitment to his quest and the manner of his death, Gandalf was sent back once again with his same mission. However, this time he was granted the power to reveal a greater amount of his true Maya strength, even though he was still there to support and guide. And so this is where Gandalf the White now had arrived in Middle-earth, being sent back to the mountaintop where he had slain the Balrog. From here, the great eagle Gwaihir once again came to his assistance, carrying him off and taking him to Lothlorien. Here he was received by Galadriel, who fitted him with new clothes and a new staff, as well as updating him on just how the Fellowship were getting on. Upon hearing of Frodo and Sam splitting from the rest, Gandalf knew he could not help them now. So instead he made to find Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli as they hunted for Merry and Pippin. After reuniting with his friends, the 4 of them made for Edoras, where Gandalf released Theoden from Grima Wormtongue's poisonous grip and encouraged him to prepare for war. And so, by Gandalf's advice, King Theoden took his army to Helm's Deep as their best form of defence, while Gandalf went off on Shadowfax to find the rest of Rohan's forces led by Erkenbrand. Gandalf managed to find them and bring them to Helm's Deep just in time. Helm's Deep was under siege, and thankfully these reinforcements of Gandalf and Erkenbrand broke the siege and saved the men inside. Now with Saruman's force defeated, Gandalf knew he must go and see the wizard himself. Saruman had become trapped in his tower after the Ents of Fangorn, along with Merry and Pippin, had ruined the outer walls of Isengard and the orcs that stayed there. Gandalf wished to forgive and gain knowledge from Saruman, but Saruman refused this, insulted. And so, Gandalf expelled him from the Order and from the Council, also breaking his staff. Now that there was definitely no hope for Saruman, Gandalf's mind quickly turned towards Gondor. He knew Sauron would be launching his attack at any time, and they had to go to their aid.
He advised Theoden to prepare to ride to Gondor as reinforcement, as he took Pippin to ride with him straight for Minas Tirith. Upon their arrival to the White City, they were met by an unwelcoming Denethor II, the ruling steward of the city. Denethor did not ban Gandalf from the city, but he certainly did not like him being there. Soon after, Gandalf would ride out of the gates on Shadowfax to drive away the Nazgul that were trying to stop Faramir's forces' retreat after losing Osgiliath, a good showing of a small percentage of his true power. And from saving Faramir, he learned of Frodo and Sam still being alive and still pushing on their mission. This was good news to Gandalf at the very least. As Gandalf had predicted, Sauron's forces led by the Witch King of Angmar would come and lay siege to Minas Tirith. Gandalf did all he could to encourage and lead the men of Minas Tirith in their defence, countering the fear that the Nazgul instilled in their enemies. But there was little he could do to defend against catapults, and so it did not take long for the bottom level of the city to start falling and be caught on fire. Gandalf would lead by example though, as when the forces of Mordor broke the main gate, Gandalf alone stood at the entrance to fight off any enemies. It was not just any enemy that appeared here though, it was the Witch King of Angmar that rode himself upon his horse into the archway. Gandalf did not waver. However, this standoff never reached its climax as the horns of Rohan sounded out. Theoden and his army had arrived just in time, and so the Witch King sped off to deal with this threat. There was no rest for Gandalf though, as Pippin found him and told him of Denethor's plan to burn both himself and Faramir alive, as grief had overcome him. Gandalf managed to save Faramir just in time, but not Denethor. As for the siege though, after the arrival of both the Rohan force and the force brought by Aragorn from the southern fiefs, the forces of good managed to break the siege and wipe out Sauron's attacking force. Gandalf's role in this battle can really not be understated. Again though, there was no time to rest after this battle, as Sauron still had power, and so the leaders of the remaining men elected Gandalf as their leader for the remainder of the war. Gandalf knew that whatever they did would be in vain if Frodo was to fail his mission, so they needed to do anything they could to help him complete his quest. He advised they took their armies north to the Morannon and distract Sauron so that Frodo's passage, which would most likely be coming from the opposite direction, could go, hopefully, unnoticed. And yes, this would result in the loss of a lot of their lives, but it is all that they could really do to help. And so they took their forces and marched upon the Black Gates of Mordor. Upon their arrival, they were met by the mouth of Sauron, who attempted to intimidate the force by revealing Frodo's mithril vest to them, saying that they had captured and tortured the hobbit that it belonged to. Gandalf would accept nothing Sauron could offer in terms of a surrender, so they prepared themselves for what could possibly be their final battle. It worked though, and Sauron sprung their trap, emptying his lands to destroy this force of men. Gandalf's plan had truly worked, as, when the battle was in its full throes, the ring was destroyed. Not by Frodo though, but by Gollum falling backwards into the lava with it. Either way though, their mission had succeeded. The Tower of Barad-dûr began to collapse, the Nazgul burned away, and Sauron was now nothing more than a shadow of what he had once been. One more time here, the great eagle Gwaihir came to Gandalf's assistance, taking him to go and see if they could find the surviving Frodo and Sam. The joy that Gandalf felt when he found them was incredible, and so the two hobbits were saved. The quest was a success, and they could now begin to rebuild their lives once again. All survivors would then return to Minas Tirith, where they would witness the coronation of Aragorn into King Elessar, with Gandalf setting the crown upon the new king's head. Gandalf's mission was complete, and so, after travelling back with the hobbits to the borders of the Shire, Gandalf would go off to spend his time to talk with good old merry Tom Bombadil. In fact, it was a couple of years until Gandalf reappeared once again, but whether this was 2 years of just talking to Tom, or whether there was something more that he did, we cannot be sure. When Gandalf did reappear though, it was to take Frodo on the white ship over the sea to a man. And so, Gandalf boarded this white ship with Frodo, Bilbo, Elrond and Galadriel, and they all took the journey west together. The wizard that was known as Gandalf returned to being the Maya known as Olorin, and that is where the journey of this divine spirit ends from what we know.
Gandalf versus the Balrog on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm is one of the most legendary moments in all of fantasy, with this event becoming even more iconic with the imagery put onto the screen by Peter Jackson. Seeing an old wizard taking on a demon of darkness and fire will always be great to see as a battle of good versus evil. But Gandalf has a few words to say to the Balrog before their swords clash, and it is something I thought that would be fun to look at today. So, when talking about this scene, of course, we must cover the passage from the book first. The Balrog reached the bridge. Gandalf stood in the middle of the span, leaning on and was gone. Now, admittedly, I didn't really need to read all of that for this video, but it is just such a great passage, and if you have not actually read the books, it is well worth hearing. I just hope my performance was at least a little bit acceptable. After all, I know that I am definitely no Sir Ian McKellen. The bit we will start with looking at today will begin with the line of,
"I am a servant of the secret fire."
What is the secret fire? Well, the secret fire also goes by the name of the Flame Imperishable, and this is the power that the creator, Eru Ilúvatar, possesses that gives it the power of creation. In other words, only by using the secret fire can things be created from nothing. We know the likes of Malkor or Sauron like to bend and twist creations into dark and disturbing things, but they could never just create from nothing, only corrupt and alter what is already there. That is why Malkor always had such a great desire to gain the Flame Imperishable. He searched the void for God knows how long for this. However, he could never locate it as it always remained with Eru. There are many people who compare this secret fire with the religious term of the Holy Spirit, if maybe that helps some of you understand a little better too. So what does this break down to? It means that Gandalf serves Eru Ilúvatar. Gandalf serves light and creation, not the servants of the being who sought this power for their own means. He reveals himself as one of the Maya, as an equal to this demon that stands across from him. He is not to be underestimated despite his old appearance. So now let's move on to the next bit of
Wielder of the Flame of Arnor.
This Flame of Arnor is a more mysterious thing as it is never referenced directly anywhere else as far as I'm aware. If we look at the word Arnor itself, it comes from the Sindarin language, where it is used to mean the sun. So in essence, Gandalf is saying he is wielding the light of the sun, once again as a way to overcome the darkness that stands before him, the polar opposite to this demon of shadow. There may even be a little more to it than that though, and that is down to Gandalf secretly also wielding one of the elven rings of power created by Celebrimbor in the Second Age. Gandalf has in his possession Narya, the Ring of Fire, that was originally given to Círdan the Shipwright. However, when Círdan received Gandalf when he was sent to Middle-earth, he could feel the burdens that would be upon him. Círdan was in fact one of only 3 beings believed to ever know the true meaning behind the 5 Istari, and this was along with Elrond and Galadriel. So perhaps he is revealing at this point that he is wielding one of the elven rings of power, perhaps in an attempt to intimidate the Balrog. Although, due to the secrecy that they try to keep these rings under, that may be unlikely. I personally believe he is more referring to simply wielding the power of the light of the sun. In other words, the power of what is good in this world. So with that covered, next we have
Dark fire will not avail you, Flame of Udun!
the dark fire part is pretty much as it says. The Balrog is a demon of fire and shadow, and corrupted and fallen Maya, one who has given into the service of Morgoth, not for light, but for darkness. But as for the Flame of Udun part, Udun is another Sindarin word, with this one meaning dark pit, underworld, or hell. So basically, a very evil place. In fact, this is also a name that one of the fortresses of Malkor went by, the one called Utumo, the first and the greatest of the fortresses that he built. This also went by the name of Udun. So quite simply, Gandalf is calling this Balrog a fire of Utumo, a flame of Malkor's, a servant of the once very powerful dark and evil Valar. In some ways, you could just think of this almost like a nickname for the Balrog. Like Gandalf might be known as Stormcrow to King Theoden due to his appearance usually bringing bad times, Flame of Udun is a reference to where this Balrog has come from. And then finally, and quite simply,
Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass!
Gandalf wishes to send him back to the hidden parts of the earth where all Balrogs that survived had dug themselves into. Away from the world that lives, away from the light, away from the risk of causing any more suffering, pain, or death. No matter what, Gandalf will not let what is basically one of his brothers go on committing any more evil acts. I mean, just think what would happen if Durin's Bane had managed to inadvertently obtain the power of the One Ring here. In fact, that may even be a fun video to delve into in the future, mightn't it? Why not leave me a comment of "The Balrog survives" if you would like me to dive into that what if possibility. But really with that there's only one place to end, and that is with Sir Ian McKellen delivering the epic line of
You shall not pass!
And so there we have it, a look at what Gandalf means when he confronts Durin's Bane on the bridge of Khazad-dûm. He reveals himself as a Maya of light to this corrupted Maya of fire and shadow. He explains he has the power of Eru Ilúvatar on his side, even hinting that he possesses one of the rings of power upon his finger too. Despite only holding a fraction of his true Maya power in the form of this old grey wizard, he still will not let this Balrog go on anymore. Gandalf will protect the Fellowship, he will protect the quest of the One Ring, even if it means the end of his time in Middle-earth. It is one of the most iconic and legendary moments from the series, and one that brings goosebumps to my skin every time of watching or reading. Have you ever wondered if these two mighty beings had met before their legendary clash on the bridge of Khazad-dûm? Well, you're in the right place. Did you know that both Gandalf and the Balrog are not just powerful beings, but actually ancient spirits known as Maiar? Gandalf, known as Alorin in his true form, was one of the wisest and most compassionate of the Maiar. The Balrog, once a noble Maiar, became a fearsome servant of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. So, let's uncover the deep history of Gandalf and the Balrog, from their origins in the timeless lands of Valinor to their fateful encounter in the dark depths of Moria. And of course, we'll delve into the burning question: did they know each other before that fateful day? Let's get started. Let's start with some background on our two mighty contenders. To understand the full scope of their encounter, we need to delve into their origins and histories. Gandalf wasn't always the grey-robed wizard we know and love. He started as Alorin, one of the Maiar spirits who lived in the blessed realm of Valinor. Alorin was known for his wisdom, kindness, and his deep understanding of the hearts and minds of all living things. He spent much of his time learning from the Valar, especially Nienna, from whom he learned the values of pity and patience. When the Valar decided to send emissaries to Middle-earth to aid in the struggle against Sauron, Alorin was chosen and became Gandalf. He was sent not to dominate, but to guide and inspire the free peoples of Middle-earth to stand against the Shadow on their own. Over the centuries, Gandalf's wisdom and courage became legendary, leading him to become a key member of the Fellowship of the Ring. On the flip side, the Balrog of Moria, also known as Durin's Bane, has a much darker history. Balrogs were originally spirits of fire, also Maiar, who were corrupted by Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. The Balrogs became his most feared servants, spreading terror and destruction during the wars of the First Age. After Morgoth's defeat, the surviving Balrogs went into hiding. The Balrog of Moria lay dormant for millennia until it was awakened by the dwarves mining too greedily and too deep in the depths of Khazad-dûm. This ancient creature of shadow and flame, with its whip and sword of fire, became one of the greatest threats in Middle-earth. To piece together whether Gandalf and the Balrog might have known each other, we need to look at the First Age. During this time, both would have been active in different capacities. Alorin, as Gandalf was known then, dwelt in Valinor, learning and serving the Valar. The Balrog, under Morgoth's command, fought in numerous battles against the forces of good. Though their paths might have not crossed directly, they were both part of the same world and aware of the great events and battles of that time. The Valar and their servants would certainly have known of Morgoth's Balrogs, just as the Balrogs would have known of the Valar and their mightiest Maiar. So to understand the history of Gandalf and the Balrog, this gives us crucial context for their dramatic confrontation in Moria. While there's no direct evidence that they had met before, their shared history as Maiar and their roles in the cosmic struggle of the First Age set the stage for a deeper exploration of their fateful encounter. Now that we have established the background of Gandalf and the Balrog, let's delve deeper into the lore of Middle-earth to uncover any connections they might have had. The Maiar are powerful spirits created by Eru Ilúvatar, serving the Valar, the greater Aina who shaped the world. The Valar were the leaders, while the Maiar served under them. Elorin was known for his wisdom and compassion, often walking unseen among elves and men to inspire hope and courage. The Balrogs, once seduced by Morgoth, became instruments of his will, embodying destruction and terror. It's crucial to note that the Maiar, especially those of note like Elorin and the Balrogs, would have known of each other's existence. The Valar, along with their Maiar, waged war against Morgoth and his forces numerous times. While direct interactions between Gandalf and the Balrog are not documented, their awareness of each other's kind is almost certain at this point. The First Age was a time of great wars and monumental events that shaped the history of Middle-earth. The Balrogs fought fiercely in these wars, serving as generals and elite warriors in Morgoth's army. They were present at major battles such as the Dagor Bragollach and the Neneth Anodiad, spreading fear and destruction. So although Elorin was not a warrior, he was deeply involved in the affairs of Middle-earth, learning from Nienna and bringing comfort to those in need. He would have been well aware of the devastation wrought by the Balrogs and the efforts to combat Morgoth's forces. To explore the possibilities of a prior connection between the two, we must obviously turn to Tolkien's writings. If we consider the Silmarillion, in this foundational text, we learn about the origins and deeds of the Maiar. The Balrogs, under the command of Morgoth, are described in several passages highlighting their fearsome nature and the key role in the First Age. In the Silmarillion, they are described as the most terrible of Morgoth's servants. Their history as fearsome warriors in the First Age is well documented, but maybe we want to look a little bit closer for any subtle clues or implications as well. One of the notable battles involving the Balrogs is at the Fall of Gondolin. Though Elorin is not mentioned in this specific context, it's likely he would of course known of such a significant event and the key players involved, obviously including the Balrogs. If we consider the unfinished tales and other writings, these texts provide additional insights into the lives and actions of the Maiar. While there is no explicit mention of Gandalf encountering a Balrog before Moria, the shared history and mutual knowledge among the Maiar suggest a possible familiarity. We learn more about Gandalf's time in Valinor and his extensive knowledge in Middle-earth's history and creatures. This background supports the idea that Gandalf would have been aware of him, backing up his statement on the bridge. And then if we consider the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf's reaction upon encountering the Balrog in Moria is telling. His grave demeanour and urgency with which he confronts the Balrog suggest more than just a casual recognition. Aye, wailed Legolas. A Balrog has come! Gimli stared with wide eyes. Durin's bane! He cried, and letting his axe fall he covered his face. A Balrog, muttered Gandalf. Now I understand. He faltered and leaned heavily on his staff. What an evil fortune, and I am already weary. Gandalf's own words and actions, as we've looked at, provide intriguing hints about his prior knowledge of the Balrog. His reaction is one of grave seriousness and urgency, indicating that he understands the full danger of this creature. His dialogue during the encounter itself is revealing too. He refers to the Balrog as a foe beyond any of you, and later as he faces the Balrog on the bridge, he names it specifically, saying, "You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun." This indicates a profound understanding of what the Balrog is and the power it wields. So you could see how the text offers substantial, albeit indirect, evidence that Gandalf and the Balrog were aware of each other, even if not personally acquainted. Gandalf's strategic response to the Balrog in Moria suggests a deep-seated knowledge. This implies that while they may not have had those personal interactions, not like they were on first-name basis or anything, his extensive wisdom and shared history of the Maiar provided him with the understanding of the Balrog's nature and threat. The writings of Tolkien offer a layered and intricate portrayal of Middle-earth's history, hinting at the deep connections between its characters. While there is no direct evidence of personal interactions between the two, again you've just got to see how the texts show it's almost undeniable that they would know about each other. So with the textual evidence laid out, maybe it's time to delve into the analysis and interpretation of what this knowledge means for that epic confrontation between the two. Analysing the text reveals significant insights into the dynamics of their encounter. Gandalf's words, "A Balrog, now I understand," show that he knows precisely what he is up against. This recognition is not just of a powerful foe, but of a specific entity with a storied past. Gandalf's authority in confronting the Balrog also suggests more than just a surface level knowledge. The proclamation again of "I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor," asserts his identity and power in a manner that implies historical and metaphysical awareness of the Balrog's nature and capabilities. But what does this recognition imply about their battle and its significance? This recognition between Gandalf and the Balrog could symbolise the ancient enmity between the forces of light and darkness, tracing back to those wars against Morgoth. Their battle in Moria thus becomes not just a fight for survival, but a continuation of an age-old struggle between good and evil. Gandalf's understanding of the Balrog and his immediate strategic response suggests that his identity as Alorin is maybe not entirely forgotten like some may believe. This battle invokes memories of his past life and the ancient conflicts he might have witnessed or known about, lending depth to his confrontation with the Balrog. So exploring the themes of their confrontation provides further insights into its significance. The awakening of the Balrog in Moria signifies the resurgence of ancient evils that the world thought long buried. Gandalf's confrontation with the Balrog is a direct clash between the remnants of these ancient powers. Gandalf's willingness to face the Balrog alone highlights his role as a protector and his readiness to sacrifice himself for the greater good. This echoes the larger themes of sacrifice and heroism prevalent throughout The Lord of the Rings. And the battle on the Bridge of Khazad-dûm symbolises a larger cosmic struggle. Gandalf, representing light and wisdom, confronts the Balrog, an embodiment of darkness and destruction. This battle therefore transcends the immediate physical conflict, representing the perpetual fight between light and dark, order and chaos. The analysis of Gandalf and the Balrog's confrontation reveals layers of meaning and significance. Their recognition of each other, rooted in their shared history as Maiar, transforms their battle into a symbol of the ancient and ongoing struggle between good and evil in Middle-earth. This recognition enriches their confrontation, adding depth to the narrative and highlighting the timeless themes of sacrifice, heroism, and the resurgence of ancient evils. So, while the evidence and analysis so far very almost clearly suggests that Gandalf and the Balrog likely knew of each other, it is essential to consider the counter-arguments and alternative interpretations to provide, of course, a balanced perspective. Some scholars and fans argue against the idea that Gandalf and the Balrog had any prior knowledge of each other, and here are the main points of skepticism. There is no explicit textual evidence in Tolkien's works that directly states Gandalf and the Balrog had met or were aware of each other personally. Their recognition could simply be due to Gandalf's extensive knowledge of Middle-earth's history and creatures. Gandalf and the Balrogs operated in different spheres and capacities. Alorin's role in Valinor involved inspiring and aiding others discreetly, whereas the Balrogs were active warriors of Morgoth. This separation might imply real limited direct interaction. Considering alternative interpretations helps us explore different dimensions of the Gandalf-Balrog encounter. One interpretation is that Gandalf's recognition of the Balrog was instinctive and based on his innate Maiar wisdom. As a Maiar, Gandalf would have an intrinsic understanding of other Maiar, especially those corrupted by Morgoth, without necessarily having personal encounters. Another perspective is viewing their battle purely symbolically. Gandalf represents the forces of good and light, while the Balrog embodies ancient evil and darkness. Their confrontation can be seen as a timeless clash of these opposing forces, independent of any personal history. Gandalf's actions and words might simply reflect his response to the immediate threat posed by the Balrog. His extensive knowledge of Middle-earth's lore would naturally inform his strategy and understanding of danger, without implying prior acquaintance. So to fully appreciate the complexity of the Balrog-Gandalf encounter, we should consider how different angles influence our interpretation. Whether or not Gandalf and the Balrog knew each other, their battle's dramatic and thematic significance remains profound. It is a pivotal moment that underscores Gandalf's role as a protector and the enduring presence of ancient evils. Exploring the possibility of prior knowledge adds depth to Gandalf's character, highlighting his ancient wisdom and the weight of his long history. On the other hand, focusing on the symbolic nature of their battle emphasizes the broader themes of Tolkien's work. So, examining counter-arguments and alternative interpretations provides a more nuanced understanding of the Gandalf-Balrog encounter. While the evidence leans towards some level of prior knowledge, it's equally plausible to view their recognition as instinctive or symbolic. This layered interpretation enriches their appreciation of their epic battle, regardless of the specific nature of their acquaintance. And so, there we have it, our exploration into whether Gandalf and the Balrog knew each other before their epic battle in Moria reveals a complex tapestry of lore and interpretation. We delved into their origins as powerful Maiar, with Elorin or Gandalf being a wise and compassionate spirit, and the Balrog being a corrupted servant of Morgoth. The shared history during the First Age suggests mutual awareness, if not direct interaction. Textual evidence from Tolkien's works highlights Gandalf's deep knowledge of the Balrog, indicating recognition beyond mere surface-level understanding though. This recognition symbolizes the ancient enmity between light and dark, with Gandalf's strategic response and heroic sacrifice underscoring his role as a guardian of Middle-earth. While some argue for instinctive recognition or a purely symbolic confrontation, the enduring mystery enriches the legendarium, inviting deeper exploration of Middle-earth's intricate histories. Ultimately, their battle captures the essence of Tolkien's themes, representing the timeless struggle between good and evil. Whether or not they had personal history, the confrontation between Gandalf and the Balrog remains one of the most iconic and significant moments in The Lord of the Rings, continuing to this day to inspire awe and wonder.
A Balrog, a demon of the ancient world.
So the Fellowship had made their way through the dangers of Moria, reaching the bridge of Khazad-dûm, also known as Durin's Bridge, near to the eastern gate of Moria. Here, after being awoken by their passage through, the fearsome Balrog of Morgoth caught up with our party. Gandalf, the wise and powerful wizard, made a brave decision here. He sent the rest of the Fellowship ahead while he confronted the Balrog at the bridge of Khazad-dûm. The bridge was 50 feet long, but narrowed to the point that you could only cross in single file. It crossed a chasm of incredible depth, and strategically it was a mighty defense. So this is where Gandalf famously stood his ground and declared, not like the movie has made famous,
You shall not pass!
Instead it was, you cannot pass. In a breathtaking moment, the wizard shattered the bridge beneath them, causing the Balrog to plummet into the deep abyss below. However, the Balrog's wicked whip snaked out and ensnared Gandalf, dragging him down into the darkness. Together, they descended into the unknown as Gandalf left the Fellowship with one last cry.
Fly, you fools!
But what occurred after this fateful encounter? If we fast forward to Gandalf's unexpected return in the Two Towers, where he reunites with the three hunters in Fangorn Forest, Gimli, everyone's favourite dwarf, couldn't contain his curiosity and eagerly asked the transformed Gandalf, now known as the White Wizard, what transpired after their separation. Come, Gandalf, tell us how you fared with the Balrog. Name him not, said Gandalf, and for a moment it seemed that a cloud of pain passed over his face, and he sat silent, looking old as death. Long time I fell, he said at last, slowly as if thinking back with difficulty. Long I fell, and he fell with me. His fire was about me, I was burned. Then we plunged into the deep water and all was dark. Cold it was as the tide of death. Almost it froze my heart. Deep is the abyss that is spanned by Durin's Bridge, and none has measured it, said Gimli. Yet it has a bottom, beyond light and knowledge, said Gandalf. Thither I came at last, to the uttermost foundations of stone. He was with me still. His fire was quenched, but now he was a thing of slime, stronger than a strangling snake. We fought far under the living earth, where time is not counted. Ever he clutched me, and ever I hewed him, till at last he fled into dark tunnels. They were not made by Durin's folk, Gimli son of Gloin. Far, far below the deepest delvings of the dwarves, the world is gnawed by nameless things. Even Sauron knows them not. It is fascinating to discover that the Balrog did not meet its end by having its fiery essence extinguished, but instead underwent a horrifying transformation. But let's delve deeper into the relentless battle between Gandalf and the Balrog. Driven by his unwavering determination, Gandalf chased after the Balrog, determined to be guided through the secret passages that would lead them out from the deepest depths of Khazad-dûm. Step by step, they ascended, climbing from the darkest dungeons to the towering peaks, as Gandalf vividly recounts. Their path took them along the endless stair, an arduous journey that eventually brought them to the summit of Celebdil in Durin's Tower, nestled at the pinnacle of the mountain. At this awe-inspiring location, the Balrog was rekindled with a newfound flame, ready to face Gandalf one final time in a battle of epic proportions known as the Battle of the Peak. For 8 days they clashed, their strength and will tested to the limits. Finally, with his very last ounce of strength, Gandalf emerged triumphant, summoning every ounce of strength to cast down his great foe. Exhausted, Gandalf's body succumbed to darkness as his spirit departed. This battle was truly a testament to the indomitable spirit of light against the forces of darkness.
Darkness took me, and I strayed out of thought and time.
But then something happens next that many perhaps did not expect. Gandalf's journey did not end there, for he was not meant to permanently reside in the blessed realm of Valinor when his mission was incomplete. In a remarkable twist of fate, it was none other than Eru Ilúvatar himself who decided to send Gandalf back to Middle-earth to fulfill his vital mission. Although Sauron still posed a formidable threat, Gandalf had an important role to play in resisting and combating this malevolent force. As one of the 5 Astari, he remained alone in still being fully committed to his original quest, earning him the responsibility of returning and continuing the fight alongside the children of Ilúvatar. But here is the fascinating part. It was not simply go back as you were. Instead, his spirit made a brief detour to the hallowed shores of Valinor, where he was bestowed with a remarkable gift. He was granted the ability to unleash a greater portion of his true Maiar strength in Middle-earth. As, for those of you who are not aware, the 5 wizards, or the Astari, were all of the same level of spirit as Sauron. However, when sent on their missions, they were not granted the ability to show and use their full power, even being given the older bodies as representation of this, as that was not the point of them being sent. It was not to combat head-on, it was to help and to guide. But if you would like to know more about the Astari and their mission in greater detail, then please leave me a comment of the true mission, as well as leaving a like on the video, and we will get working on that for you.
This new Gandalf's more grumpy than the old one.
With his newfound power, Gandalf was sent back to the very location where he had fallen in Middle-earth, ready to resume his mission. As Gandalf recounts his extraordinary return to the 3 hunters, he shares these words. Naked I was sent back, for a brief time, until my task is done, and naked I lay upon the mountain top. The tower behind was crumbled into dust, the window gone, and ruined stair was choked with burned and broken stone. I was alone, forgotten, without escape upon the hard horn of the world. There I lay staring upward, while the stars wheeled over, and each day was as long as a life age of the earth. Faint to my ears came the gathered rumours of all lands, and springing and the dying, the song and the weeping, and the slow everlasting groan of overburdened stone. And so at the last Gwaihir the Windlord found me again, and he took me up and bore me away. Despite possessing awe-inspiring powers now that could instill fear in any ally of Sauron, he did not wield them in a dominant or authoritative manner unless really forced to. This was not Gandalf's way. His mission remained unchanged from the moment he was first sent to Middle-earth, to aid and bolster the resistance against Sauron, rather than seize control and lead the charge himself. Now let's dive into what unfolded between Gandalf's encounter with Gwaihir and his reunion with the 3 hunters in Fangorn Forest. Once discovered by the mighty eagle, Gwaihir, Gandalf's next destination was Lothlorien. It was within this enchanted realm that he replenished his strength, was donned with new white robes, and received a splendid staff gifted by the Lady Galadriel and the Woodland Elves. It was during this time that Gandalf also learned of the Fellowship's subsequent events after his departure. He was informed of Frodo's decision to venture forth, separate from the rest of the group. Realizing that due to this, he could no longer directly assist Frodo, Gandalf set his sights on Fangorn Forest, his intention being to reunite with the three hunters and then proceed to Edoras. As an interesting addition here, Gandalf did not simply go under the radar until he met with the three hunters again. No, he actually challenged Sauron. When Gandalf is talking about Treebeard to Legolas, he mentions the following. I saw him 4 days ago striding among the trees, and I think he saw me, for he paused. But I did not speak, for I was heavy with thought and weary after my struggle with the Eye of Mordor, and he did not speak either, nor call my name. If you cast your mind back to the breaking of the Fellowship, when Frodo put the One Ring on and he witnesses the Dark Tower that did not sleep, and he felt the Eye, there was also a voice that battled against the gaze that came, and one that yelled to Frodo too, "Take it off! Fool, take it off! Take off the ring!" That battle was from Gandalf as he protected Frodo as best he could at that moment, even if it did leave him slightly drained afterwards. And so then, the events of the book then unfold from this point onwards, as he meets up once again with Aragorn, Legolas and Gimli as we know. He learned that although Frodo had left the Fellowship, at least Sam had gone with him, and this made him happy. It put him more at peace. And from there, he gave each of the three a message from Galadriel too. And then so from there, great battles come and go, difficult challenges arise and are defeated, and all in all, one of the greatest stories ever is told. So there we have it. A duel between Gandalf and the Balrog in Moria is a legendary moment in fantasy. It represents the clash between good and corruption. After their initial confrontation, Gandalf pursued the Balrog and they battled fiercely from the lowest dungeon to the highest peak above Moria. Gandalf emerged victorious, but at the cost of his physical form. However, his journey did not end there. With a renewed purpose and bestowed with greater power, Gandalf returned to Middle-earth to continue his mission against the forces of Sauron. The duel and its aftermath highlight Gandalf's unwavering commitment to the fight for good and the resilience of light against the darkness. Gandalf came to us as the wandering grey wizard, the one who loved and appreciated all life in Middle-earth, and he left us as the powerful Gandalf the White, with still the same love and care, but with far more power. Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. Today we are considering what are the differences between when Gandalf arrived to when he left. As you may recall from some of our previous videos, like the full story of Saruman, Gandalf's arrival in Middle-earth came as one of the 5 Istari, or wizards, who came into the lands and mingled among the peoples, each in the guise of an elderly bearded gentleman with a natural skill for magic and perhaps pipeweed too. Despite the brief glimpses that we get into his life, that being the character whose actions and words we are able to read and understand, as though he was speaking directly to us, like the sun. Though it was not made specifically for one of us or the other, it is there to shine for us all to see. And Gandalf, as you will see, is often linked to the sun, by metaphor or spirit. We will consider each. Gandalf was unable to exert the true extent of his force as Gandalf the Grey, which is why the spirit or Fëa is caged in such a frail and unassuming frame. When sent to Middle-earth as part of an order who were purposed to oppose Sauron in the early Third Age, when he was rumoured to yet survive the cutting of the ring from his finger. Despite winning the battle, the War of the Last Alliance was uniquely descriptive of how the elves and men of Middle-earth understand peace, with that it was more than a period of infighting between wars. Lost in the disaster of the Gladden Fields, the ring is lost for nearly 2,500 years, and Sauron is not yet strong enough to come forth and declare himself. Rather, he has been hiding behind the alias of the Necromancer, and some 900 years prior to the Hobbit adventure, we know that Gandalf investigated Dol Guldur, this being in the year 2063 of the Third Age, for the first time. From Gandalf's appearance, Sauron would take flight and remain in rest for a period known then as the Watchful Peace, spanning 400 years before Sauron would once again return to Dol Guldur. If we fast forward to 90 years before The Hobbit now, Gandalf returned once more to Dol Guldur in secrecy. Here, he retrieved the map and key of Erebor from Thrain II, having found him in the dungeons there in such a state that he could not even remember his own name. In fact, Gandalf wouldn't even find out who this dwarf was until a later date. Despite this discovery though, the White Council failed to act, for which Saruman's duplicity can be credited. A century afterwards, and Saruman learns of Sauron's search. Thus would Saruman discover the secret of Sauron's actions. The One Ring's location was drawing ever closer to the Dark Lord, which put it in Sauron's reach, and only then, when it threatened Saruman's long-term goals for greater power and dominion, did the White Wizard, head of the White Council, agree to finally attack Dol Guldur. This takes place during the events recounted in The Hobbit, being in the year 2941, as the attack on Dol Guldur takes place after Gandalf leaves the dwarves in Mirkwood. This is Gandalf acting as the protector of all that is good in the world, as he knows that there is more to power than just force, which, after he dies from his injuries in his duel with the Balrog of Morgoth, Durin's Bane, Tolkien tells us that Gandalf was resurrected by Eru Ilúvatar himself. He was sent by a mere prudent plan of the angelic Valar or governors, but authority had taken up this plan and enlarged it at the moment of its failure. It would seem that the Valar and those in Valinor had not forgotten Gandalf, being the Maiar named Olorin in his youth, and with his newly reinvigorated spirit and healed of his wounds, he does not, however, retain doubt, fear, and he is more focused with the mandate from Ilúvatar to see his mission to its end, as he is the only one of the emissaries of the Valar to have not deviated from his mission. At this time it is claimed that he can match Sauron with power, as we see his powers expanded immensely. His hood and his grey rags were flung away, his white garments shone. He lifted up his staff, and Gimli's axe leaped from his grasp and fell ringing on the ground. The sword of Aragorn, stiff in his motionless hand, blazed with a sudden fire. Legolas gave a great shout and shot an arrow high into the air. It vanished in a flash of flame. The risk of losing perspective by believing in the lie of personal greatness and power is what lies at the thematic heart of The Lord of the Rings. The power they have is power they are loaned, but for a time. The elves and the Maiar, like Gandalf, distinguish spirit, also known as Feia, from the body, also known as the Hroa. When the latter dies, the former departs and is spirited away to the halls of Mandos, there to remain until the prophesied Dagor Dagorath, a Sindarin phrase meaning battle of all battles, which is believed to come at the end of time as an apocalyptic battle, albeit Christopher Tolkien had claimed his father had abandoned this idea by the time of his death. Although, if you would like to see a video on all that we know about this last battle, please leave me a comment below of Dagor Dagorath please, and we will get working on that for you. But anyway, the truth is that the power Gandalf has he knows is not all his own, but rather on loan to him for a time and gifted to him from the uttermost high, Eru himself, and it is no accident he is often mentioned in the same breath as the sun. For example, when he appears before the three riders. He stepped down from the rock, and picking up his grey cloak wrapped it about him. It seemed as if the sun had been shining, and now was hid in cloud again. Gandalf the White is returned invigorated, alive with the memory of his home Valinor. Removed are the grey shrouds of wear and tear over his physical form. Removed are his doubts, his fears. Focused he has become. He now has permission to match power with power. He knows the chess pieces are already in motion, and he knows what he needs to do, or at least he knows where to start. If we think back to the quote from a minute ago, which will be on screen now in case you need it, but it is in reference to how easily he disarms the three hunters. This is power beyond maybe even Sauron. It is thought that the gap between Aragorn and Elendil is not so great that Aragorn would be completely harmless against one of the Maiar, while Elendil, albeit with aid of Gil-galad, could slay one. This may make you think though, why didn't Gandalf just go on about fighting Sauron himself head on after returning? Despite arguably displaying greater power than Sauron, Gandalf still expresses reluctance in facing Sauron in the chapter of the Palantir in The Lord of the Rings. Even now my heart desires to test my will upon it, to see if I could not wrench it from him and turn it where I would. This suggests to me either that the power he uses at times is not wholly his own, and thus he cannot make his own use of it on a whim, or again, there have been limitations placed on his power still. The latter makes less sense, as he expresses that he is less dangerous than Sauron, despite debatably showing power beyond Sauron's scope, which leads to the belief that at times his power is being lent from a source outside of himself. He also seems to have a subtle metaphysical relationship with the sun. Obviously, he shines like the sun when first revealed to the three hunters. Again, it seemed as if the sun had been shining, but now was hid in cloud again. But many of Gandalf the White's significant moments are either paired with the bright shining sun or the rising sun matching the hope and wonder he inspires. Sometimes by his own hand, other times it seems as if his timings have been planned impeccably. Let us just have a quick think of 3 examples now of this. We have when he first returns to the three hunters. His hair was white as snow in the sunshine, and gleaming white was his robe. Then, when he is freeing Theoden from Wormtongue's poison, he lifted his staff and pointed to a high window, where the darkness seemed to clear, and through the opening could be seen, high and far, a patch of shining sky. Not all is dark. Take courage, Lord of the Mark. And also when he arrives at the Battle of the Hornburg with Erkenbrand and the reinforcements. There suddenly upon a ridge appeared a rider, clad in white, shining in the rising sun. His relationship with the sun is both metaphorical and seemingly literal, with the brightness of the sun often even aiding his purposes, making him appear brighter, supporting his charge at Helm's Deep, playing some part in his spell at Edoras. Again, his eventful moments coinciding with the sun suggests a preciseness beyond what would be expected of him, and seems to have a touch of Eru's hand maybe upon his shoulder, if you would. So this would make it very apparent how Gandalf the White is infinitely more powerful than before, because he has a mandate from Eru and thus his omnipotent will behind him. The easiest way to understand the transition from one to the other is being promoted for going above and beyond the call of duty. He was understood on sight as worthy to carry the Elven Ring of Power, Narya, that was gifted to him by Círdan the Shipwright. But Círdan, from their first meeting at the Grey Havens, divined in him the greatest spirit and the wisest, and he welcomed him with reverence, and he gave to his keeping the third ring, Narya the Red. This is reiterated when we later read Círdan's perception that Gandalf was the greatest of them. Though it is true, Saruman was the head of the White Council, but so it was only as Gandalf sought not power nor to increase his standing, but to wander the lands of Middle-earth and motivate, shine a light on the lives of everyone he saw. Galadriel put Gandalf forward to lead the Order, though when the position was offered to him, he did refuse, and should any doubts remain as to how Gandalf in the White Robes compares to the other formerly white-robed wizard, Tolkien appears to settle this matter. Saruman soon became jealous of Gandalf, and this rivalry turned at last to a hatred, the deeper for being concealed, and the more bitter in that Saruman knew in his heart that the Grey Wanderer had the greater strength, and the greater influence upon the dwellers in Middle-earth, even though he hid his power and desired neither fear nor reverence. Saruman did not revere him, but he grew to fear him, being ever uncertain how much Gandalf perceived of his inner mind, troubled more by his silences than his words. What we must understand is that these wizards are not magicians, unlikely to conjure magic by way of the casting of spells or the use of hexes, charms, or alakazam. The powers imbued in the Astari comes from their nature, as part of the order in which they come as emissaries of the Valar, endowed with certain traits which allow them to work a type of nature magic. The power used is only what is necessary. This too is what makes Gandalf much different to Saruman or Sauron. To Tolkien, the proper exercise of power was defensive and selfless, as wisdom, knowledge, and insight all are powerful tools at one's disposal. Gandalf was the wisest of the Maiar. As we discussed in a previous video, Tolkien suggested that Gandalf is the closest match to Sauron, and we have further information in the Unfinished Tales. It was believed by many of the faithful of that time that Gandalf was the last appearance of Manwë himself, before his final withdrawal to the Watchtower of Taniquetil. But I think it was not so. To the overthrow of Morgoth he sent his herald Eonwë. To the defeat of Sauron would he not then send some lesser but mighty spirit of the angelic people, one coeval and equal, doubtless, with Sauron in their beginnings, but not more? Olorin was his name, but of Olorin we shall never know more than he revealed in Gandalf. It is considered that Gandalf was in his earliest hours apprenticed to Manwë, as Saruman and Sauron were to Aule, although he is also associated with Urmo, Vardar, and Niena as well, learning great lore from them all. There is also a theory, and this is drawn from the constant symbols of Manwë that find their way to Gandalf. The great eagles, for example, are descended from the eagles of Manwë, whose great king, Thorondor, fought the great dragons of Morgoth alongside Eärendil in the War of the Jewels. In The Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Eagles Gwaihir, a descendant of Thorondor, carries Gandalf 3 times. But that is assuming that the Lord of the Eagles from The Hobbit is not the same great eagle, which if it was, would actually be at least 5 times. But either way, Gandalf has a great relationships with these great eagles of Manwë. Tolkien also loved comparisons. For example, Aragorn and Arwen were almost like the reincarnated Beren and Luthien. Manwë was to Morgoth what Gandalf was to Sauron. While Morgoth Sauron might have started with an edge, the Manwë Gandalf replaced their positions in Eru's creation and even defeated them. Manwë started out as second in command of the Ainur, despite having as deep of an insight into Eru's music as Melkor. This is why he led the second theme in fact. And later then he became leader. Gandalf started out as second in command of the Astari, and later then became the leader of the Wizards. Círdan gave Narya to the member of the Astari that he thought was the greatest, therefore the most likely to succeed against Sauron. It was given his team every advantage that he could. Saruman's jealousy of Gandalf speaks to his insecurity and already well-developed ego. Almost at the moment of his arrival, Saruman thought himself as slighted by Círdan for choosing Gandalf over him. The great Saruman the White, by Gandalf's wisdom, and probably by his power as well. The line in The Two Towers is fitting, though it fails to capture the totality of what we have in this resurrection and transformation. Gandalf claims to be Saruman, but
Rather Saruman as he should have been.
of each character Tolkien invests in making an example of doing good in the world, Gandalf is the one who carries Middle-earth like Arda's own Atlas. The weight of the world and suffering of so many had for so long been on his shoulders that they were broken, and upon giving his all, he was, in a word, promoted. He is shown to be of unique spirit and wholesome character time and again. When he is gifted the Elven Ring of Fire by Círdan, when Galadriel suggests he lead the White Council, we have a man who would die for the chance to save a friend. The way that he halted Durin's Bane at the cost of his own life speaks to the greatness of Gandalf, greatness unattainable to beings of Sauron and Saruman's ilk, as their actions served themselves and themselves only. To understand the power of Gandalf and what he does for the side of goodness is more than what physical force provides. Gandalf the White is imbued with a power unthinkable and beyond reach of Sauron, that of hope, of faith, and of friendship, that of something worth preserving, worth fighting for in all the world. Like Sam said,
But there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. And it's worth fighting for.
This is a better motivating factor than Sauron can offer, as power derived from fear is fragile and requires the constant abuse of one's own soldiers, which is not a strategically sound treatment of one's infantry. Of particular note is how often Gandalf is compared to the sun. From afar it appears a simple light, as a drifting candle far away, though the light comes from such great distance that we cannot appreciate the immensity of the power within the sun, the churning, unimaginable destructive force. And each morning, without force or fright, the sunrise drives the darkness from the field, and Gandalf does the same for the people of Middle-earth, as he set over the side of the mountain when he smote the Balrog on the mountainside. He was not going to break that promise. The rebirth of Gandalf is the promise of tomorrow being kept, the certainty of goodness driving evil out and away in time, regardless of how long it should take. Gandalf the Grey is thus reborn, a reminder that the gifts of God in the world of Tolkien are not given vainly, and his powers are the endowment of his being. The gifts of Eru and the mandate of his rebirth change him from the wandering person who was there to inspire hope and resistance everywhere he went in the years that Sauron spent rebuilding his armies and the 70 years of repairs done to Barad-dûr prior to the Lord of the Rings. Being so often linked to the sun, it is not so far-fetched to think he has visited Eärendil sometime, far into the ancient past or in times more recent. Though this is symbolic of what Gandalf's power really is, and how it works despite not being primarily wielded with force to inflict violence. And tomorrow's promise is not guaranteed to us, and as such, we can only hope. Gandalf is the sunrise that drives off the darkness. He is a high note in the Song of the Ainur, a bright, ever-inspiring and hopeful key that inspires others, and protects them with a radiance of his own, though he is wise enough to know that it does not belong to him. So with that, the study of Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White, we can see how Gandalf the Grey is the unassuming old man who wanders lands and inspires hope in everyone he comes across, from the kings of lands to the halflings in hiding. When picked for his task, Olorin had to be persuaded, as he admitted the fear he held for Sauron, but this was all the more reason Manwë wished him to go. He would rarely show any hint of real power, using his subtle arts and tricks to win the day and show that hope can be found in the darkest of places. Some of his more fun pastimes would be using his powers to entertain others, as we see with his famous firework displays. It shows how much of his power comes from fire though, and whether this was affected by or enhanced by his possession of Narya is actually never addressed. Either way though, when in dire situations, it would be the use of pyrotechnic type moves that would be his go-to form of attack. And of course, when a Balrog would stand in front of him, that would be the time to unleash his full wrath, even at the cost of his weak, elderly body. However, when Gandalf the White is returned, he is invigorated by the removal of the grey shrouds of wear and tear over his physical form, along with much of the doubt and fear that had affected him. He had a greater level of charisma, and this most likely came to the confidence that came with that new power. He could break Saruman's staff with the spoken word, compared to his time as the Grey when he was kept as a prisoner by that same being. It is not like he was ever weak as the Grey, but when returned he was given more access to his true Maya power, along with the permission to do more with it too. In a way, the training wheels had been taken off, and he had a job to do. It is said he could have fought Sauron head to head with his power of the White. Now that is not to say he is the greatest Maya of them all. Potentially when Sauron had the One Ring it would have been a different story, but at this point in the Lord of the Rings, it is fair to say Gandalf was an almighty power. But of all the characters, it is Meriadoc Brandybuck who has a good description of his change in the Lord of the Rings, so I will end this now with his words. He has grown, or something. He can be both kinder and more alarming, merrier and more solemn than before, I think.
A wizard is never late, Frodo Baggins. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.
So, of the Istari, there were 5, and of those 5, the fate of only 3 is known with any certainty. Arriving with the other 4, and last of these, Gandalf arrived in Middle-earth in the Third Age. He is well met by a certain Círdan the Shipwright, the bearded elf himself.
So taken with Gandalf, the ancient being gifts him one of the 3 elven rings of power, Narya, telling him that he will have need of it. "Take this ring, master," he said, "for your labours will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you will have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it you may rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill. But as for me, my heart is with the sea, and I will dwell by the grey shores until the last ship sails. I will await you." The Great Grey Pilgrim, one of the most popular fictional characters of the 20th century. Gandalf the Grey, Alorin, Mithrandir, known by many names over the course of many ages. Gandalf demonstrates his power in more subtle ways than we see from other literary wizards. To give full context to the previous quotation from The Lord of the Rings, it will be good to also look at the Unfinished Tales, as here is a slightly more full account of the incident and its outcome, which is important for later stories. "For," he said, "great labours and perils lie before you, and lest your task prove too great and wearisome, take this ring for your aid and comfort. It was entrusted to me only to keep secret, and here upon the west shores it is idle, but I deem that in days ere long to come it should be in nobler hands than mine, that may wield it for the kindling of all hearts to courage." And the grey messenger took the ring, and kept it ever secret. Yet the white messenger, who was skilled to uncover all secrets, after a time became aware of this gift, and begrudged it, and it was the beginning of the hidden ill will that he bore to the grey, which afterwards became manifest. Gandalf is both ancient and powerful, this much is well known, but to the extent of his power that is shown, much more can be revealed by looking closely at the text and seeing what we can further learn. Of course, the Ring Narya, one of the elven 3 rings of power, is fairly well known to have been worn by Gandalf, but less known perhaps would be Gandalf's actual telepathy and the reading of minds. So, let's dive into this. Gandalf has an otherworldly sense of perception, prophetic insight even. It is Gandalf who left the Ring of Barahir with Galadriel in Lothlorien, and he told her that in the right time, the right one would come and he would be named Elisar. And well, that story is one that we do cover fully in our History of the Ring of Barahir video if you want to know more on that. However, what this demonstrates is how Gandalf is able to use foresight to see into future events, just as he was able to prophesize the coming of Aragorn and the changing of his name. He would also see much that would come to pass and be important during the War of the Ring. The importance of hobbits, as well as the confounding and inexplicable role that he foresaw that Gollum had to play. This was crucial in the end, as it is important to remember. Frodo failed. In his mission, he became corrupted by the One Ring at that last moment, and when the time came for him to rid himself of it forever, he claimed it as his own and disappeared. If not for the role Gollum played, tackling him as he did, the world of men in the Fourth Age might have been much bleaker, much darker of a place. As the wielder of the Flame of Anor, you could make the argument that he is a spiritual being composed of fire, the flame imperishable, or the sun, not that same fire of Morgoth or Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, but of the fire that is the stars, the light of the 2 trees, Talperion and Laurelin, and the light. This is the life-bringing, nourishing warmth of the sun, as we briefly mentioned in our video on the differences between Gandalf the Grey and the reanimated Gandalf the White. But as to focus on his true power here, we have several different categories to look into. His enhanced level of perception allowed him to see the invisible West Gate of Moria when the Fellowship arrived at an apparent rock wall. The moon now shone upon the grey face of the rock, but they could see nothing else for a while. Then slowly on the surface, where the wizard's hands had passed, faint lines appeared, like slender veins of silver running in the stone. At times he is also shown to be able to read minds, in particular the mind of Frodo, though he apologizes for doing so upon his waking in Rivendell. In the chapter of many meetings we have. "You have talked long in your sleep, Frodo," said Gandalf gently, and it has not been hard for me to read your mind and memory. Gandalf admits this is not proper, as he did not have Frodo's permission to do so. Though he inquired only after Frodo's health and well-being, no harm was incurred, nor intended. This gives the impression that there are at least other practitioners of telepathy within Tolkien's Legendarium, and that not everyone capable of this power is as restrained or as polite in using it as Gandalf shows himself to be. There is a lot to distinguish the way Sauron uses his power and how Gandalf uses his strength. Gandalf never uses them to control someone outright, though there could be an argument made that he did just that during his and Bilbo's long conversation after his 111st birthday party. We have instances where Professor Tolkien draws our attention to the fire gleaming in Gandalf's eyes as he speaks and listens to Bilbo. Regardless of working with someone who is not quite themselves, he is able to work through those psychological barriers put up by the One Ring that's trying to keep it out of the hands that it wants to be in. Regardless, this scene mirrors what he later does for Theoden King at Meduseld, while he is similarly under Saruman's power by the way of Wormtongue's poisonous words and, well, his poisonous poisons. In the end though, like Theoden, Bilbo is able to free himself of it and feels so much better immediately, and some warmth and colour comes back to him, and he is inspired.
And he lived happily ever after, to the end of his days.
Inspiring others is a gift, and as a practitioner of inspiration and uplifting others, Gandalf is unrivaled in all of Middle-earth. What Sauron is to manipulation and deceit, Gandalf is to hopefulness and pulling from the depths unknown. Gandalf is a natural leader of men, but seeks not power over them, as he is put forward to lead the White Council, but he refuses the compliment and prefers to do the work without the need for praise or laurels. When sent to Middle-earth, he had the humility to admit his fears and admit weakness to Manwë himself. Manwë replied that he wished Alorin to go as a messenger to Middle-earth, but Alorin declared that he was too weak for such a task, and that he feared Sauron. Then Manwë said that that was all the more reason why he should go, and that he commanded Alorin. In the Silmarillion of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, we learn that Gandalf was able to shapeshift, or at least put on different guises. For though he loved the elves, he walked among them unseen or in form as one of them. The work we have from the Unfinished Tales fleshes this out a bit too. The Maiar were spirits, but capable of self-incarnation and could take humane forms. In addition to telepathy, he shows that he is capable of telekinesis on a number of occasions too. The first might have been when he reappeared as Gandalf the White upon meeting Aragorn, Gimli and Legolas in Fangorn Forest, where he demonstrates this ability in brilliant fashion. He lifted up his staff, and Gimli's axe leaped from his grasp and fell ringing on the ground. The sword of Aragorn, stiff in his motionless hand, blazed with a sudden flame. Legolas gave a great shout and shot an arrow high into the air. It vanished in a flash of flame. Similarly, he is able to disarm Denethor in the Pyre of Denethor Chapter 2. But Gandalf sprang up the steps. The men fell back from him and covered their eyes, for his coming was like the incoming of a white light into a dark place, and he came with great anger. He lifted up his hand, and in the very stroke the sword of Denethor flew up and left his grasp and fell behind him in the shadows of the house. And Denethor stepped backward before Gandalf, as one amazed. Gandalf led the Fellowship of the Ring until he was confronted by Durin's Bane at the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and he took this pass of deciding to go into Moria over Aragorn's explicit disagreement with this route when turned away from the path of Caradhras. And it must be said, Aragorn ran at the Nazgul with sword in hand and torch in other, so this is not a man easily cowed or frightened. In the film though, when they try to pass Caradhras, it is shown to be Saruman who causes this, but in the book, this is more subtle, and more likely that it is Sauron, since Gandalf seems to think that the mountain itself is alive and powerful, and the power required for this kind of spellcasting is beyond Saruman, and Gandalf knew this. He is capable of great spellcasting himself, not merely spells that have marvellous effects and flashing lights. He was partially responsible for the flooding of the Ford of Bruinen, when he transformed the waves of Elrond into certain shapes, sweeping the Nazgul away. But there's another instance too, when the Company of the Ring are encamped. We get a cryptic moment wherein Frodo sees the stars above disappear and a shadow fall over the high heavens. What this is, or whether it was Sauron reaching out for him as he often felt, or if it was the Nazgul disposed of a physical form being summoned back to Mordor, either could be argued. But when Gandalf says it's just a wisp of cloud, a line given to Gimli in the films, it seems to be a deliberate falsehood on Gandalf's part. At all times he had to consider both the physical and mental health of the Ringbearer, and throughout the story we see Gandalf work tirelessly for others, not once for himself, and in doing so gives us insight into what Tolkien thought of leadership, courage, and what it was to be honourable and to be wise. Not only can he wield subtle, perceptual disturbances with his style of magic, he tells us a bit more while stuck at the doors of Durin, where he told his companions, "I once knew every spell in all the tongues of elves or men or orcs that was ever used for such a purpose. I could still remember 10 score of them without searching in my mind." Similarly, he attempts to keep the Balrog from reaching them by barring the door. Frodo thought he could hear the voice of Gandalf above, muttering words that ran down the sloping roof with a sighing echo. He could not catch what was said. The walls seemed to be trembling. Every now and again the drumbeats throbbed and rolled. Doom. Doom. And yet at this point we know that Gandalf is restricted by conscience and the frailties of his flesh. Gandalf was always limited in some form or another, by form of his incarnation, before his death and resurrection. And as Gandalf the White, he was limited still, but by his conscience. Indeed, after he startles the 3 hunters in Fangorn Forest, he is quick to settle their rattled nerves. "Get up, my good Gimli. No blame to you and no harm done to me. Indeed, my friends, none of you have any weapon that could hurt me." "Dangerous," cried Gandalf. "And so am I. Very dangerous. More dangerous than anything you will ever meet unless you are brought alive before the seat of the Dark Lord." What keeps him from being the equal of Sauron ultimately comes down to this restraint, his concern and his love for his friends, their world, and for the future. Sauron acts without restraint, compassion, or moral compunction. He just does whatever he wants and uses his power as he desires. It may be argued that Sauron's glory days were behind him at the time of The Lord of the Rings. Indeed, that he was more formidable and imposing of an enemy in the days of his power and majesty as Lord of the Earth, until he was finally thrown down by the collective might of the Last Alliance. War is foul business, and it involves the loss of friends, of family, and of harmony in the world. It scars and traumatizes the men and women who fight, directly or indirectly, on the front lines or in the hospitals. It is a business of death, and Gandalf we know would do no such business were there any recourse available. Amongst the wisest of the Maiar, and functionally immortal, Gandalf was a great force of good in the Third Age, and in addition to the strengths given him by his rank and nature, he had strength of character. He chose to do what was right, whatever the difficulty. Approaching Gandalf is like how Aragorn and Frodo saw flashes of light in the horizon as they approached Amon Sul, better known as Weathertop. We see flashes of brilliance and of light, and we understand that this is from a greater power than ourselves. But as to the true nature of that power and its source, many say it is the reason for the lightning and the thunderstorm. Also, that Gandalf was able to defeat Durin's Bane is not what made him so strong. It was that he should step in front of his friends to shield them in doing so. As Aragorn ran toward the Nazgul with flame and steel, Gandalf approached a Balrog of Morgoth and attempted to give him fair warning that though his soul belonged to Eru, and well, you know the rest.
You shall not pass!
He is not strong because he could do these things. He is strong because he did them. So there we have it. Flashes of light in the dark, a smile on a troubled day, a breeze in the height of summer. Gandalf was as the sun to the beings of Middle-earth. And as we said in an earlier profile of Gandalf, he is like the sun in many ways. First and foremost, the glimpse of it is a promise kept, the promise of tomorrow, of better times to come, the ultimate promise that good will be triumphant in the end. Gandalf's ability to inspire is not constrained to Middle-earth, as it is certain that Gandalf has inspired many millions of people. Our community is one brought together by the love for this world and its character, out of respect and admiration for Professor Tolkien, and it's important to bring this up. If Gandalf or any other Tolkien character has ever personally inspired you, please tell us in the comments below. If Tolkien ever inspired you to pick up a pen and pad and to write your own fantastical stories, tell us about that too. Gandalf is one of inspiration, and this is what we want to share today. Gandalf has played more than a passing role in many of our lives, as an inspiration to us and to so many others. We would advise you to consider that, for Gandalf, power and strength are not the same. Power is a gross abuse of strength, and at times it requires more strength to walk away from a fight, more wisdom to avoid some battles and take on what you can when you are able. And as always, there is always hope.
Just a fool's hope.